Greetings, folks. Welcome to a little episode about my thoughts on the nature of God and reality. Today, I want to talk about this philosophical perspective that I've recently heard on, or this logical proof for the existence of God, which I thought was kind of stupid. Now, I haven't actually examined the entirety of this philosopher's perspective. I don't even know which philosopher it was. Somebody essentially described the basis of the argument to me, and I've heard arguments like this, and it always irks me, but I could never really tell what it was that irked me about these kinds of arguments until I figured it out, and now I figured it out, so now I want to talk about it. Basically, the argument goes, humans, so it's an argument against the problem of evil. And I don't love the problem of evil because nothing about the problem of evil seems to have utility or really works within the framework that I've laid out. So when I'm thinking about the nature of God, I kind of go from, okay, I'm experiencing this world, I've experienced all the things, I discovered God, and now I'm going to figure out the nature of God. Whereas evil, the problem of evil kind of starts with this assumption about this is the nature of God, and then therefore, because of these observations, God can't exist. And I think that's kind of a backwards way to do it. And so then I think most of the counter arguments to the problem of evil just seem to kind of fall short of actually articulating anything about the nature of God or being useful proofs for God or whatever. So basically the good logical, there are two that I'll kind of go into, and they're both relatively similar. The bulletproof logical proof of or logical argument against this claim that God cannot exist if evil exists in the world is basically that we as humans are stupid and we do not understand how certain things are good for us. And while something may seem bad in the short term, it's in fact good for us in the long term. And so all these things that we deem evil are in fact good for us. We just, with our limited understanding and perspective, fail to see how it's benefiting us. So the argument kind of goes, or the illustration is, imagine you have a child who wants to eat a bunch of candy or wants to eat something that is poisonous, and you're like, no, you cannot eat the thing that is poisonous. They're deprived of this thing that they want, and so they're like, no, this sucks. And then as a result, they believe that what has been done to them, that their parents are doing an evil thing to them, but then they are unable to, but they're unable to see that, okay, well, this is actually good for them because they're going to be healthier, they'll live longer, they won't get cavities, they'll feel good, all that kind of stuff. Leibniz has a similar argument, and I feel like this is just kind of this is like a modern philosopher who wrote this in some book recently. And I feel like this is kind of like a modern reframing of Leibniz's perspective, which is pretty much that there are all these possible realities, and God has set things up such that we live in the best of all possible realities. And humans still have free will, and it gets complicated and weird, but it's like humans still have free will, but God fine-tuned the parameters of our reality such that we would freely choose all the things that would lead to the best possible reality, which is just like, it's kind of like the deterministic, or the determinists arguments, where it's like, everything you say, they're like, but it was due to these antecedent factors, and you can just infinitely come up with new antecedent factors to explain away any idea or any counter-argument against determinism. It's one of these purely rational ideas that, while there's no technical logical hole in it, and I could go more into I couldn't go more into the depths and the complexities of these arguments. A few years I could have with Leibniz. I studied that guy too much. And with this other argument about the child, it's like I can't go too deep into that. But these kinds of arguments frustrate me, and I'm sure you'll encounter these kinds of logical arguments in other situations. And Sir Francis Bacon talks about such arguments. He talks about how rationalists are like spiders, and that's not to say that they're like scary and evil and poisonous and want to kill you. It's to say that they create something of a substance that's internal to them, right? So a spider creates its webs, and then it creates with its webs, it creates its whole web. And a rationalist's perspective on the world, or conception of reality or God or whatever, it's like this beautiful, intricate, and fully interconnected set of ideas and logic and connections of ideas, right? And you can think of how a spider web is fully connected. Any question that you have, it comes to some other junction of webs, or it takes you this way, that way, whatever, but it's complete and it's whole. And I think many rationalistic perspectives kind of feel like this. Every question you have to ask, it has an answer, and yet none of the answers and none of the substance of this worldview or of this conception of reality comes from things out in the world. Instead, it comes from items within the mind, or it comes from the substance of the mind. It comes from rationality. It comes from these thoughts that are just, they don't feel grounded in reality because there's nothing true to them, or there's nothing substantial to them, there's nothing material to them. And Sir Francis Bacon also argues against pure materialists who, you know, like Berkeley has this whole fucking thing where he's like, as soon as I stop looking at something, I don't know if it still exists, but then it pops back into reality when I look back at it. And it's like, bro, like, what's the use of this? And also, like, I think you can reason about things a little bit more and be like, hey, man, like, I stopped looking at a thing, but maybe because it's still there, when I look back, I can know that it continued to exist. But they don't believe that anything exists beyond perception, or, well, that's not necessarily one of their views. But they rely too heavily on observation, and they don't make anything of their observations. It's like, what the hell? Oh, that is one nasty freaking wasp. Oh my god, it's eating something too. Gee whiz, man. Anyway, so I'm gonna keep my freaking eye on that. I don't know where it's gone. Anyway, so instead, what you've got to do is you've got to be like the bees. So this is, you shouldn't be like the ants, you shouldn't be like the spiders, you should be like the bees, and go out into the world and gather the materials of the world, and then combine it with your own substances to create something of value. And that's what the bees do. They go out and they get the pollen and they bring it back to their honeycomb. What do the bees live in? A nest? Well, no, that's what wasps live in. Anyway, but they bring it back and they fuck around with it, and then bam, they've got something of value. Honey, that tastes good, and you can put it on bread, and it's like got nutritious value and all this bullshit. So what's the point that I'm trying to make? Yes, the point, the thing that pisses me off about a lot of these worldviews, determinism is one of them. I think Leibniz's argument against evil and his interpretation of free will, all these things have no real utility. For one, they're just arguments, they're just words. And again, they don't start in reality, they start in the mind. And they're just words, ultimately. Sophistry, just mere sophistry meant to impress and perhaps be logically coherent and logically impenetrable, but have no real consequence. And of course, when you can say they do have consequence, in the sense that, okay, well, you've discarded this problem of evil, and so then you can say, oh, well, and the Bible's real. And I think you see leaps like this often in the church, where you assume that because you've discarded or done away with an argument against the existence of God, you've proven the existence of the God described in the Bible, or your conception of the God described in the Bible. And it's like, you haven't necessarily gotten that far yet, mister. So I don't know, that's kind of my thought on that. I'm sure there's more I'd like to say, but I'll stop it there, because we're about 30 seconds away from 10 minutes, and I want to try and keep these things short. So farewell.